Welcome back to the Cressida build. So in the last one, if you missed it, I just finished swapping an S13 rear end into this car with a few minor upgrades so that I can have a little bit more camber control in the rear and just in general just have more availability for parts. So if you missed that, go check it out. But today, if you haven't noticed already, I have no brakes front or rear in this car. So let's remedy that. Alright, so starting with the rear, the setup is pretty basic back here. I'm just sticking with regular old S13 brakes. I thought about swapping on some Z32 brakes, calipers at least, but I come to find out that without either redrilling the Z32 rotors or swapping 5-lug, you can't really do that swap. So because I already had the parts for the S13 brakes, I decided to just scrap that for now. Maybe some other day, maybe on a different car. But for now, we're just going to stick with the factory S13 brakes. I think they will do just fine for what I need them for. So, for starters, got some, I'm pretty sure, Stop Tech or some random brand drilled slotted rotors just to have a little bit more bite in the rear, because I am going to be running a hydro e-brake. I want to be able to lock up these rear calipers pretty easily, and I think these will help maybe a little bit with that. Honestly, the drills and the slots don't really help so much with that as much as cooling, but still I'd like to get some relatively performance brake rotors in the rear. So those pop right on. And I'm just going to be running these used calipers. I didn't feel like paying for new ones, and I'm pretty sure these ones work just fine. They're a little ugly, I never really cleaned them up, but I can always do that later. Oh well. And as for brake pads, I went with a cheaper option just because I don't really think it's going to be that necessary for me to get some like really high-end pads for this. I'm really just locking up some pads, and if they make a little more dust and noise and stuff, I don't really care, right? So I went with some Power Stop track day pads. I think the rears are actually specifically track day spec. I don't think I was able to get the exact same ones front and rear. I can't tell. But anyway, track day pads from Power Stop, and just some fresh hardware. And that's basically it. I do need to get some different hoses more than likely. I mean, not only are these used and old, they're also just the regular rubber kind. I'd like to get some steel braided ones. But I need to see if these are even going to fit first. I don't really think they will, because the mounting point for this end on the chassis on an MX-73 is a little further in than it would be on an S13, so I might have to relocate that or get some longer ones. I did get some Z32 swap front brake hoses that I was going to use back here until I realized the fitting was different, so oh well, right? But anyway, with that out of the way, let me go ahead and just get these on the car. Just like that. Simple, easy, straightforward, works. And in case you haven't noticed, I don't have any brake cables attached for the parking brake. That's because my parking brake was so rusted underneath that it actually snapped off the place where it would connect to the cables, so I decided I'm just not going to run one. Yeah, see what I mean? That's where it used to connect to something, but it was literally being held together by about 1 or 2 millimeters of metal, and then it just snapped as I pulled it one day. And I really don't feel like trying to source one of these right now, so maybe another day, but for now, I'm just going to live without it. And like I said, the brake connection point on these is all the way back there. The hose doesn't really reach all the way, so I'm either gonna have to get some longer hoses. Like I said, I had the front Z32 brake swap hoses that I was gonna use and just wrap them all the way back here and come through here and connect, but I really don't think that those will work with this fitting, because I don't think there's actually a bottoming out point on this for where it would work with a regular double flare fitting. So gonna have to figure out something for that, but for now we're just gonna move on to the fronts and call that good for now. And the reason for the spacer, not only for fitment's sake, but Nissans use a very large center bore. I think it's like 67 mil or something like that. Toyotas use like a 57, 58. So it's much wider than the Toyota center bore for the OEM wheels that I'm using. So I spaced it out just enough. There's still a lip, but the inner portion of the wheel, the center bore, does come up a little bit right there. So they still bolt on just fine with just these, I believe 10 mil spacers. But Luckily that doesn't mess up fitment too much, and they still fit within the wheel well, just barely. Like I had to clearance the crap out of this fender to make everything clear, but they do clear now. But anyway, with that being done, let's move on to the fronts. All right, so normally on the MX-73s, the front brakes actually have a rotor that will mount to the back side of the hub by 4 individual bolts back here. So you have to remove your whole hub to get to the rotor to swap it out if you need to. And plus the factory brake is just a relatively big, just one pot brake that works okay enough for street use, but I want some more performance out of this. So what I'll be going with is some factory 4-pot rotors off of another Nissan, in this case the Z32, but I think these are exactly the same as like an R32 or, I don't know, I think they come off of at least one other model, but they're just Z32 front brakes. They're 4-pot calipers with, you know, more racing style pad, right? Using the same pads as in the rear, the Power Stop Track Day or Track Day Spec, one of the two, and just some new hardware. Now in order to swap these on to this chassis, you got to get a little creative, but it's honestly not too bad. So for starters, the base of the whole operation you're going to need is some front rotors off of a 1998 Mazda MPV, I believe 4-cylinder all-wheel drive minivan. And you're going to need to get them re-drilled for 4x114 because that is a car that uses 5x114. So not a big deal. Take it to your machine shop, they'll drill it right out for you. And I actually ended up having to order 3 different rotors for the same car to try to get the right ones for this swap until I finally found the right ones. So to save you the trouble, that's the part number you're going to want to go with, or anything comparable to that. I tried to get some drilled and slotted up front, but both times I ordered, they, you know, processed it and then emailed me and said, hey, we don't actually have those. So I ended up giving up on that and just running some regular rotors, but they'll work just fine for what I'm using them for, I think. And then on top of getting them re-drilled, you're also going to have to take your hubs off, take them to the machine shop, and get this outer edge machined down smaller because it's too wide from factory to fit these rotors over top. So machine this down so that it fits in this hole, get these re-drilled for 4x114, and then they just slip right on. As for the calipers, now if you're using the steel calipers, which I am in this case because I had some extra aluminums that I'm wanting to swap onto my Z32, these came off of it. The mounting points on these are a little skinnier than the aluminum ones are. So what I had to do when I was test fitting aluminum ones was to use a somewhat thick washer as a spacer to space them out the right amount. But I find that the steel ones fit perfectly with no spacers. But you will want to keep your MX-73 caliper bolts on hand because the Z32 ones are too long and they'll interfere with your rotors. But luckily, with the right rotors, these are a direct bolt on. They actually have the exact same spacing for the mounting bolts as the MX-73 calipers. So you don't have to modify anything, which is wonderful. And they literally fit perfectly. There's a perfect gap right here. They make perfect contact with the rotors. There's just a very slight overhang, like 1 millimeter from the rotors. So you got full contact on the pads and everything. And after that, all you really got to worry about is how you want to send fluid to them, which what I ended up using is an ISR S13, S14 front Z32 brake swap hose. Obviously this will work for the Z32 brakes. And then this end has the same threads and everything for the vehicle side, chassis side of the MX-73. So this bolts right in, this bolts right in, and then all you gotta do is just work out some way to mount the hose out of the way of everything so it doesn't get broken by something. Easy as that. Fitting is very unfortunately an 11 mil. My only complaint about this kit, honestly, but you know, not the end of the world. And there you go. Got it all hooked up right there. You're not going to be able to use like, well, you can. I mean, you can use the spring clip for holding this in place in general, but there's nothing actually to stop this from rotating. So 19 mil wrench, 10 mil line wrench should be fine. Just to get that tightened up, and then obviously this side just goes in, and I'm gonna just find some solution to zip tie this up somewhere just so it doesn't catch on anything and snap off while driving, because that'd be a bad day. But just like that, I got Z32 brakes on the front end of an MX-73 Cressida. And if you just happen to be running the OEM wheels on this car, they do fit. They clear perfectly fine. There's plenty of clearance, you know, on the going this way, and then I have mine spaced out just for fitment, but even without a spacer, they fit just fine. So if you want to run these with 15-inch wheels, I believe these are 15. Yeah, 15-inch wheels, they'll work just fine for you. All right, well, it has been a few days since y'all last seen me because it's literally been raining for like 4 or 5 days straight, so I haven't really had time to film just about anything. But in the meantime, I did knock out a little bit of stuff off camera. So for starters, got my new traction ons in, so I got those all installed. Figured out exactly the solution to my brake line or brake hose issue in the rear. So these are S13 front brake hoses from ISR. They have the exact same fitting in the rear as they do up front, so you can just use the rears or the fronts in the rear. And I think it gave me just enough length to route it around back behind this part of the subframe and to connect where it needs to on the Cressida, so I don't have to like relocate my brake lines, like the hard lines or anything anyway. And I also got my new springs in and got the top hats all welded in and fully installed, so rear suspension is now 100% ready to go, aside from, you know, little things like tightening stuff up and alignments and stuff. But the next part was going to be the brake booster. And I've also had to take a few days of just figuring stuff out because I ran into some issues. For starters, obviously this is bad. I got a new one of those. That's easy. But my booster is also jammed up, unfortunately. If I were to press it down, which I can't even really do anymore, like, it all gets jammed up and this will just get stuck inwards. And it's just not working well enough that I want to trust it for actual use. And these are really hard to come by because, like, you can't really buy them new. No one sells them, and they're off an old, you know, 85 to 88 car. So yeah, I had to figure out another solution. And that solution is this. So while this probably doesn't look all that crazy to you because it's more or less just a normal setup as far as brake boosters and masters go, I'm actually really happy that what this is worked out for me, because it really matches up with what I'm doing as far as my brake calipers go. So this is a Z32 NA, I think they're the same as twin turbo, but whatever, NA, brand new master cylinder. And this is a booster out of an S14. Luckily, it seems like all Nissans, you know, at least from that time, use the same pattern for the master cylinder bolting to the booster and the booster bolting to the firewall. So all I really had to do to make this work was re-drill the holes in the firewall for the new booster, but then I ran into the issue of the holes in the brake pedal assembly not really working out the same way, because they're a little more, it's a little bit more than just, you know, hole spacing on that. There's like spacers and everything too. So as I showed before, I need a new brake pedal anyway. And what I ended up doing is actually using the brake pedal assembly out of the S14 as well. All I had to do to make it work was to drill a new hole at the top for it to bolt up, and then it just kind of bent itself into position once I tightened that down. And then that obviously works with the bolt pattern for the booster. All I had to do was just bolt it up just the way it was. And then the S14 pedal didn't quite sit where I wanted it to. It would have sat like about 2 inches further, at least, I'm pretty sure, if I remember how much I measured it out to once I had it in there. But I swapped that out for the MX-73 pedal, just the pedal, not the like bracket for the pedal. All I had to do was add a little bit of a spacer up there and drill out the S14 stud. Luckily the MX-73 just uses a bolt and nut, so I was able to put that in. So all I have left to do as far as making that work is to relocate the brake sensor, like pickup piece, whatever you want, the little bumper at the top. I gotta relocate either the bracket or the bumper, probably the bracket, to make that work. And then luckily the threads are exactly the same, so that worked out for the MX-73 brake pedal sensor. I gotta get a new one of those though, because it's also jammed up and ruined just like every other piece on this car. And I ended up using the same little fork piece to connect the booster to the pedal from the S14, but I had to drill out the hole in that just a little bit bigger to make the pin for the MX-73 pedal fit through, because it's a little bit bigger. And then this is all pressed in right now, but you can see all the pedals now line up pretty much perfectly, exactly where they need to go, and that should work out perfectly. There is one more thing I had to do to make all this work, because with the spacing of everything through the firewall, because there's actually no spacers between the pedal and the firewall for the S14, they're built into the chassis on an S14. It would have sat way too far forward and would have had almost no like movement on the fork. So luckily I have a friend with an R32 Skyline who just happened to also be swapping out his booster, because his other one was like filled with oil or something like that. We don't really know 100% what was going on with that, but luckily those cars use a OEM metal spacer that's about 1 inch between the pedal and the firewall, and that turned out to be exactly the spacing I needed, so I just mounted it between the firewall and the booster instead. It should work just the same. I'm really not worried about it. There's still the same thing holding the threads into the firewall and the pedal, so I'm not worried about this pushing out of like that. I've already tested it. I've already blowed the brakes. I need to get a little bit more brake fluid. Ran out halfway through and just had enough to not get air in the system. But between all of that, all I had to do is make some custom lines. Luckily it's also a 2-line master. Sometimes you just get one, but luckily these are 2, just like the Cressida. So made some custom brake lines, and just like that I have an S14 brake pedal and booster with a 300ZX master cylinder and an MX-73 Cressida with 300ZX and S13 brakes. So I'm hoping that this will work out perfectly. Like I said, I've already bled the system and got brake pressure everywhere. All my brake calipers seem to be good, no binding, anything like that. And time will tell how proportioning will work out, but I'm honestly not too concerned about it. But with all that out of the way, there's only one more brake related modification that I want to do to this car. And for that, we got to move into the interior. So you can see throughout the last few days, I spent a little bit of time making this very crude custom seat bracket, because I needed to know exactly where I was going to be sitting inside the car for this next piece to know how spacing and where my hands will be and everything will work out. So big thing for drifting is to use a hydraulic e-brake to lock up the rear wheels and be able to kind of control your slide just a little bit more. Now I'm not going to be abusing this too much, but I do want to have one. So luckily I've had this literally sitting around in storage for about 4 or 5 years now, because I was going to put it on my FD back in Japan and ended up just not wanting to cut up my interior and weld stuff to my trans tunnel and whatnot. So kind of happy I didn't. And after getting the seat in and everything, you know, lined up, got a feel for where everything's going to sit, steering wheel and everything wise, and I'm going to be putting this right about here. Just I got some of these screws are more or less center line with where the hole for the shifter will be, and that's pretty much a perfect position for where I want it to sit. So I'm going to weld it on right there, right along that seam. Can't quite do the same past here because it's a little bit different in space, so I'll just make some support pieces for underneath, and that's exactly where that'll sit. And then all I gotta do is run some custom lines to go to this, and this style is the no reservoir style. So what this will do is it'll actually pass through. So if the line running to the rear brakes, all I gotta do is just split it, bring one side up into this fitting, and then out of this fitting into the back, and what that'll do is let pressure just go straight through this until I rip it, and that will only press out pressure from here to the back. So it'll basically just be stealing that same fluid in the brake lines and sending it to the rear, so that I can just lock those up whenever I want to without sending any pressure up front to the front brakes. So let me go ahead and do a little bit more fabrication, start welding stuff in here, making some gussets and whatnot so I can mount this, and I'll get all that finished up somewhat off camera, more than likely. Alright, we got it tacked into place, you know, or fully welded, one or the other. But obviously with that being the only thing, it's a little wobbly, so got a little cardboard template that'll fit right up in there, and that should work to support that side to side. I'll probably add another one back here as well, and that should be enough, honestly. All right, all done, fully mounted. Got a couple little gussets in there to keep it rigid, so it's not gonna go either way. And I got the whole area coated in a decent layer of some Steel It Gray. This stuff, I'm sure you've heard of it by now. This, I know I said I'm not really gonna paint this car, but personal comfort, you know, being considered, this stuff is slowly going to cover the entire floor of this car, just because I don't want to have to look at all this forever, you know. So expect the entire floor to look something along the lines of this at some point, just for cleanliness sake. But now I'm gonna go ahead and let that dry for a little bit so that I'm not touching wet paint. Then I will get the actual handbrake bolted on more or less permanently, and we'll start drilling some holes and running some new lines to actually make this a functional piece. Well, as if it hadn't rained enough in the last week, it's rained again all day, and then got a little bit of, you know, just overcast skies. But the forecast is calling for like another 3 or 4 days of rain in a row. So I've decided that as soon as I'm done with this video, I'm gonna go buy a canopy, because I don't have time for this. But in the meantime, I did have just enough time to finish this up. So I got the seat all mounted up. Got my bracket finished and painted. Obviously painted the rest of the floor with that other stuff. And this is now fully, I guess, lined up. So I decided to go with some hard lines instead of buying soft lines, just because I don't want those flopping around underneath the car and doesn't feel like paying for them anyway. So this one feeds underneath the car from the brake master cylinder where it goes and tees off to the rear brakes. So take suction in here, and then this one pushes out and just goes towards the rear brakes to lock them up. And I feel like it's going to work a little bit better once the engine is on. It has vacuum, you know, going to the booster, but it still feels nice and hard when you get down to about the halfway point, and once you pump the brakes a couple times, it's like immediate. So unfortunately I got no way of testing whether or not I locked up the brakes, because can't really keep them spinning right now, just way too much resistance on them. But I'm fairly certain this is sending plenty of pressure to the rear brakes to lock them up. And to show you what's going on underneath the car, like I said, we have the line coming from the T off the master cylinder that goes to rear brakes. I've simply just split it right here, bent these both outwards. Got these little, what do you call that, like splicing pieces for the brake lines. And then these are all just custom new hard lines running up. I got them mounted as close to the chassis as I can to clear the drive shaft. And then they just go up through these two holes. It used to hold the center console in, but I went ahead and just drilled them out because I'm not using that anymore anyway, and put a couple grommets in there. I don't think those grommets are doing a whole lot other than just getting cut up, but you know, better have them there than not, I guess. And yeah, that's it. It's pretty simple. Just a couple hard lines and then loop back to the back. And obviously got the master cylinder topped off and all the brakes bled. And so the pedal is nice and firm. Like I said, I think it'll work better once the booster has vacuum going to it, because right now it is just a little sloppy, but it still hardens up with a couple pumps. But yeah, I made sure there's no air in the line, so not 100% sure if, you know, I missed some air or if I just need vacuum going to the booster or what, but pretty sure this will work just fine. And with that finished up, the brakes are now 100% finished. Obviously got rear brakes, hydro to lock them up, front Nissan 300ZX brakes, and 300ZX/S14 booster and master cylinder. The only thing I have to do to completely finish this whole setup is to relocate the sensor for the brakes on the pedal. But that's pretty simple though, just literally just cutting, welding in a new spot so where it lines up. So I'm gonna do that at a later date. But for now, I have my engine back from the machine shop. I got everything else cleaned up, ready to go. So nothing's really holding me back from finishing up my engine at this point, and I want to knock that out as soon as possible. So that will be in the next one. Until then, hope you enjoyed. Leave a like if you did, and subscribe to see more, and I'll see you guys next time.